So what I would suggest you do, since you probably have a meat locker on the ship, is stick this guy in a meat locker and take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. I'm Chaz Freeman. I entered the Foreign Service of the United States in December 1965. Went through a brief course of familiarization with the U.S. government and consular work, which is tough stuff. And at the end of this, we were all assigned our initial post. And I swear that the way they did that was to turn away from a world map and fling a dart at it. And I ended up being assigned to Madras, now called Chennai in India, in the south of India in Tamil Nadu. About 4 weeks after I arrived, I was the duty officer at the consulate. About 1 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from the captain of the USS Manhattan, which was a very large grain carrier. We were involved in a grain lift to India to help the Indians whose agriculture had failed, basically under very bad policies. He said, well, I'm the captain, and I've got a corpse here. The cook on our ship chugged 2 bottles of vodka on a bet, and he died. He said, I want you to come pick him up and put him in storage. And I said, well, Captain, I'm sorry to say that you've reached me at home, of course, and it's the middle of the night. I don't have a large enough refrigerator to stick this guy in. So he said, well, what do I do? I said, well, let me ask you a question. Are you inside the harbor or somewhere outside? He said, oh, no, I'm in the harbor. I said, well, then you're subject to Indian jurisdiction. There'll have to be some sort of investigation, determination of cause, and maybe even an autopsy. And so what I would suggest you do, since you probably have a meat locker on the ship, is stick this guy in a meat locker and take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. So he agreed, and next morning I went and talked to the Indian Harbor Police, and sure enough, they took him off the vessel, and he had died of acute alcoholism. And Tamil Nadu, like other South Indian states, was dry. So they hadn't seen this kind of condition medically for quite a while. And they called an all South India medical conference to allow every doctor in the region to have a poke at this guy. And meantime, I was in touch with his wife, estranged wife, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And she told me he always wanted to be buried at sea. And I said, well, actually, I've arranged to get even though the investigation's not complete, I've arranged to get the ship released, and it's already sailed. I could hire a tugboat and perform the burial at sea myself if you want. She said, oh yes, here's some money, do it. So I hired a tugboat, and I went down to the docks, and I was waiting for the Indian police to deliver the corpse. I'd asked them to prepare it for burial at sea. I waited and waited. I had a Brahmin assistant, very conscious of spiritual and other pollution. And my assistant and I are waiting there, and nothing happens. About 20 minutes late, up pulls a taxi with 2 bloody bare feet sticking out the back door. My Brahmin assistant took one look at this and turned 3 shades paler than he was and declined to have anything to do with it. So I went to the taxi, took the corpse out of the back. It was all full of wounds from old dried blood from the autopsy, wrapped in a sheet, laid him on the wharf, and said to my assistant, go to the hardware store and buy some rope and 2 crowbars. And he came back, and I put the crowbars on the guy, and I rewrapped the sheet and tied him up in a rope. And nobody would carry him onto the ship. So I did that. I carried him onto the ship, put him on the transom, and I said to the captain of the little tugboat, I said, according to the Foreign Service regulations as they stood, you have to take a sighting with a sextant to determine the precise latitude and longitude where this man is going to be deposited. He said, no problem, I did that 35 years ago at the Bombay Merchant Marine Academy. So we'd get underway. Well, I didn't know that whereas Tamil Nadu, the state was dry, once you were underway, you were not under its jurisdiction. So he pulled out a bottle of whiskey and started drinking. And by the time we got beyond the 3-mile limit, the drift line, as it were, he was pretty sloshed. I made him take a sighting. Turned out later when I looked at it that it was somewhere in downtown Singapore. But, and I had to consult a map and fake the coordinates. But I put I had the man on the transom. I took a Bible. I had an American flag. I laid it over him. I read the service and gave him a good kick, and off he went. Glug, 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 down. So I reported, of course, that I had officiated at a very dignified burial at sea for this gentleman, and the wife was very happy. It's clear that I was not a very good consular officer, but I was good at improvising as we went. I should say I had several other incidents, but I will leave those for another time.